Hey everyone, welcome to Blue Bench Podcast. My name is Gabby Crevitt. I'm the Communications Director with the Montana Democratic Party. Today, we are thrilled to welcome DNC Chair Ken Martin, a key leader in shaping the future of the Democratic Party and championing rural America. Let's get started. Hello everyone, welcome to Blue Bench Podcast. Today, we have a very special show with a very special guest. Democratic National Committee Chair Ken Martin is joining us today to discuss the future of the Democratic Party and Democratic politics in rural America. Chair Martin, thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Thank you, Gabby. It's just a delight to be here.
Well, let's jump right in. So you've held the position of DNC Chair for a few months now. How are things going and what challenges have you already encountered? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, well, I just crossed my 4-month mark actually yesterday. And so we're off to the races, of course, already. And, look, I think obviously there's still a little bit of fatigue from the last election year. But what we've seen actually is a lot of positive momentum over these last 4 months now. In fact, there's been wind at our back. When you think about this, we've had 28 special elections since Donald Trump was inaugurated, and we've overperformed in all but one of those special elections, and we're winning up and down the ballot. Of course, just a couple weeks ago, we won a special election for Omaha, not a special election for the Omaha mayor seat, actually. A 12-year incumbent Republican mayor was defeated by Mayor-elect John Ewing, a real improbable upset, and we're seeing races that we're winning up and down the ballot, of course, in the state of Pennsylvania, we took a plus 23% Trump district that hasn't been represented by a Democrat since the 1880s, and we flipped that seat. We flipped a state House seat in Iowa, similar long-held Republican seat that was flipped. And so we're doing that throughout the country. There's great momentum on our side right now, and I'm really excited about what we're seeing out there.
That's awesome. So I'm assuming a lot of that has to do with organizing. So do you have any updates on how states are organizing across the country and how we've been able to rebound like this so far?
Yeah, I mean, look, Gabby, as you know, I ran on a platform of the idea that if you organize everywhere, you can win anywhere. And it's really important that we take a larger look at how we're building throughout the country, right? We can't just be a party that's focused on 7 battleground states or a few congressional seats. We actually have to realize that if we're going to turn a red state to a purple state to a blue state, it's going to take time, energy, and money. And we have to be organizing up and down the ballot, not just on federal races, but on state races, local races. And then we have to organize throughout each of our states and frankly, throughout the country, right? So, I think for too long, the Democratic Party has ignored huge pockets of our states, huge pockets of rural America, and it's been to our own detriment because we're not organizing there. Of course, what ends up happening, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're never going to actually keep an area blue unless you keep organizing there, and you're certainly only going to keep areas red if you never organize at all. And so we have to get back to organizing. It has to be year-round. It has to be persistent, and frankly, it has to be well-resourced. That's why I'm really proud of the fact that we just negotiated out the deepest investments ever in our state parties and the grassroots of our party through our state party partnership, through our Organize Everywhere, Win Anywhere program, which essentially means we're delivering more resources than ever before in our national party's history to red states and certainly to other states as well. And so I'm really excited about that agreement because that's going to allow our state parties to do even more than they ever have to help us stand up year-round organizing, to help us reach out to various parts of our states that we haven't for some time, and to make sure that we're bringing people back into the conversation.
I'm hearing you really emphasize a lot of the success we're seeing on local levels. Is that part of the success of or part of the, I guess, mission of the Democratic Party right now is to really dig deep into those local races, looking at city, county, and up to state legislature? Is that a big focus right now for you guys?
Yeah, it has to be, Gabby, because the reality is I've studied the conservative movement now for some time, and the reality is that they have built a machinery that really focuses not just on winning federal power, but really winning power up and down the ballot at all levels of government. And our own indifference, for instance, to local offices, i.e. school boards, has resulted in some of the largest school boards in the country being taken over by the far right, where they're, of course, banning books and whitewashing history and attacking our children. The reality is that's as much on them as it is on us, because we view these positions as nonpartisan races. Well, it's BS. There's no such thing as a nonpartisan race anymore. Every office has been politicized, and we need to be competing there. We need to be running candidates at the very local level. Not just to groom them for higher office, not just to organize around local issues, but frankly, because we have to compete in those public policy arenas around our agenda and around our values. And so it's really critical that we stop ignoring those seats and actually start competing. Now, the other piece of it, selfishly for the party, is that when we organize at that level, excuse me, we know that we can create a reverse coattail effect, that running candidates at local levels actually has a lift of anywhere from 2 to 4% for candidates that are running higher up on the ballot, whether it's for state legislature, congressional, statewide races, etc.
So when you ran, you said you would get the DNC out of DC. How's that going, and what's been your favorite trip so far?
Wow, that's great. And when I ran, Gabby, it's sort of funny when I said that. People said, "What do you mean? Are you going to get the move the headquarters to some other state?" No, it's really changing the mindset. Look, most people here in Washington, D.C., first off, all they care about is federal power. Second, most of them, and especially these consultants, have never set foot in states like yours and mine, and certainly have never talked to voters. And so we have to get out into our states. We have to know that there are people like you and others on the ground in states throughout this country who know better on how to win elections and how to build coalitions in your states. And so we have to change the mindset. Look, I have been now in over 20 states now as DNC chair just in the last 4 months, right? We are making sure that we're traveling around. I've been in a number of red states, purple states, and blue states. I think some of my most, they've all been great visits, of course, but, just to name a few off the top of my head, I was just in Utah, really critical emerging target for us, a red state that will eventually be blue given their population, fast-growing population. They're one of the youngest states in the country. They're one of the few states in the last election cycle that actually moved leftward versus rightward. And there's real opportunity for us in a state like Utah, even though it seems very red. I was just down in Arkansas, as another state where we see great opportunity. They're the only state in the last election cycle that actually added Democratic seats to their state legislature, as an example. And they have fast-growing populations in the Northwest, in Fayetteville and Bentonville. They have great opportunities, of course, with the fast-growing demographic changes. So, in addition, one of my very first visits was to the state of Missouri, where I met with rural farmers and had amazing conversations about what was happening, unfortunately, with USAID cuts and, of course, the recent tariffs. And so I say all this, Gabby, because we have to get outside of D.C. We have to get out into these states to understand what's happening. And, again, it goes back to a very simple philosophy that we have grounded all of us here at the DNC around, which is we have to be a national party. And to do that, we have to organize everywhere.
Great. So I just want to shift the conversation slightly to rural America.
Yep.
and ask you, what do you think national Democrats have gotten wrong about rural America in the past, and how is your vision going to change things?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I think that when people here in D.C. talk about rural America, they approach it through one sort of lens of what rural America looks like. And you know this better than anyone, Gabby. The reality is rural America looks different depending on where you're at. In Minnesota, even in Minnesota, right, a fairly large state geographically, we're the 13th largest state from a geographic standpoint in the nation. If you go down to southern Minnesota, it's all, corn and soybeans and, beef cattle. Like my father-in-law is a beef cattle farmer down there. You go up to northeastern Minnesota, it's iron miners and it's, loggers and it's the timber industry, right? You go over to western Minnesota and it's sugar beets in the Red River Valley. The reality is every part of my state is uniquely different. And that's true of this country, right? I was in Alaska last year, and rural Alaska is completely different than probably rural Montana and certainly rural Minnesota. Now, there are similarities, of course, right? One of the biggest similarities is declining populations in rural communities, the fact that there's not as much access to health care and jobs and educational opportunities. We see that, towns are drying up, economies are depressed, and people are feeling like their way of life is being left behind and that people don't care. And so I say that because while we acknowledge that these communities are different in many ways, depending where you live, there are similarities. And a lot of folks in rural communities are feeling forgotten, they're feeling dispossessed, they're feeling left behind, and they feel, frankly, like our party's abandoned them and have given up on them. I'll use my father-in-law's story as an example, Gabby. David O'Rourke is my father-in-law, and his family has farmed their farm in southern Minnesota for 135 years, right? All in the same family. And he's voted Democrat his whole life up until 2016. And when I asked him, well, why did you vote for Donald Trump? I thought I was going to get something about farm policy. But you know what he said? He said, look, uh, none of my kids, this is my wife, right? None of my kids want to come home and farm the land that's been in our family for 135 years. The clinic on Main Street has closed up, so I have to drive 100 miles to get health care. The high school I went to has consolidated with another school, so I don't have a Friday night football game to go to. He's going down the list of all these things, and you realize what this guy is 85 years old. And he shouldn't have a worry in the world about his future. He should be living carefree at the end of his life. Yeah, he's got a knot of anxiety in his gut because he feels like his identity is being taken away. He feels like his community is completely changing around him, and he feels like people have forgotten about him and his community. At the end of the day, that's the story of so many people in rural America who just want people to see them, to hear them, to fight for them. And so along comes this snake oil salesman named Donald Trump saying, I'm going to make America great again. Of course, to Dave O'Rourke, he's like, yeah, I do want things to be like they used to be, right? I do want my communities to thrive again. I do want robust Main Street and a Friday night football game to go to, right? And, you start thinking about this and you realize that, people, sure, some people vote on policies and issues, but more than anything, Gabby, people vote on perceptions and feelings. And unfortunately, in rural parts of this country, there's a feeling that the Democratic Party has given up on them. And so, we have to fight for those communities just as much as we fight for any other.
Right. I have to tell you that story of your father-in-law sounds insanely familiar to what we hear a lot here in Montana. So
yes,
thank you for sharing that. So how can we in Montana and some of these other, more red rural states, how can we adapt the national message to resonate more with these rural populations, but without compromising our values? This is something we grapple with every day as a party.
Yeah, I think this is important because it's really critical that we recognize that we have always been the party that's fought for the working class, the middle class, and the poor. We've always believed that no matter where you live, no matter who you are, where you're from, you should be able to build a better life for your family. But we also have been the party, Gabby, that's also fought for people who are being marginalized and oppressed and discriminated against and bullied and pushed out of the conversation. So it's not an either or. We can do both for sure. I thought Governor Andy Beshear from Kentucky did a wonderful job in his op-ed right after the election in November in the New York Times, where he said, look, we don't have to abandon who we are to focus on an economic agenda that gives people hope for the future, right? And so the idea of demonizing certain communities and saying, oh, that this community is the reason we lost the election, or because we had a conversation around LGBTQ rights, that's the reason we lost the election. I think it's short-sighted, it's completely misguided, and it's not accurate. But I do believe that we do have to focus on an economic agenda. And I think, at some point, Gabby, we started as a party to message to smaller and smaller parts of our coalition. We'd have a message for this group, a message for that group, a message for this group. And the reality is that because of that, we lost the thing that connects all parts of the coalition. And the thing that connects all parts of the coalition is economics and an economic agenda. Everyone has a job. Everyone is working their tails off. Most people are working harder than they ever have before, and they're not getting ahead. They're only getting by. And so there's a fierce belief in this country in the American dream. The idea that if you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to climb the economic ladder and pass a better life off to your families. But the reality is that for so many people, right, they feel like that is a distant reality. And so what we have to do is we really have to focus on an economic agenda that gives them hope that they can, no matter, again, where they live, no matter what part of the country they live in, no matter where they're from, no matter where they came from or their parents came from, no matter who they love or frankly who they are, that our party is going to fight for them. And that is a critical piece of this, right? At this point, it's not an either or. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can be true to our values and always protect vulnerable communities and people being harassed and pushed out of the conversation, while also giving people hope within our party that we recognize the thing that connects all of them is economics.
Great. I do want to ask you about healthcare. I know we were just talking about economics. I want to ask you about the attacks on Medicaid that we are seeing in Washington. All of our national delegation seems to be lining up behind Trump's big, beautiful bill. And us as a party, we'd like to know, and I'm sure other parties, in red states, how do we make sure that Montanans know that these Republicans that they elected are not looking out for them? How can we get that message across?
Well, I think the reality is what you see across the country, not just in Montana, but everywhere in this country, is widespread support for Medicaid and for SNAP and for Social Security and the social safety net, which has been the fabric of this country for years now. There's no and this cuts across ideological lines and party. Republicans, independents, and Democrats, a majority of all of those groups support these programs. They realize the impact it has on their families, on their communities, on their states, in this country. And so, but what we have to do, Gabby, is we have to personalize it, right? Because every one of us, while some folks may not feel like they're beneficiaries of Medicaid or SNAP right now, the reality is they know someone in their community, or they know communities that are going to have to deal with the devastating impacts. And it's quite pervasive. Over 40% of people who give birth in this country, by the way, Gabby, are able to do so because of benefits from Medicaid, as an example, right? And we know that millions of Americans are going to lose their health care once Medicaid is taken away. And so, look, they're doing it under the guise of efficiency and work requirements and all these other pieces. Let's be very honest about what this is. And we have to speak with one loud voice, right? This is an immoral document. It's an immoral policy, which is essentially going to kick millions of people off of their health care, take food away from starving families, all to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people in our communities, the wealthiest people in our country who already have so much. And we have to call it out for what it is. And look, Gabby, Hubert Humphrey, who is from Minnesota, a great elected official from here, former vice president, former senator, he said it best a long time ago when he said, the moral test of government is how government treats those in the dawn of life, our children, those in the twilight of life, our seniors, and those in the shadows of life, the sick and the disabled and handicapped. And so let me ask you this, Gabby, is it moral to take food away from starving children? Hell no. Is it moral to kick seniors out of nursing home? Hell no. Is it moral to take health care away from the disabled and the handicapped? Hell no. So we got to speak up on this and not through a partisan lens. This isn't about party. This is about who we are as this country. And we have always believed that we have to have a social safety net so no one falls through the cracks. And what this would do is take away critical health care and critical food nutrition programs for those who need it the most. And last thing I'll say is this. Look, my mom was 15 years old when she had me, Gabby. She raised 4 kids on her own. By the time she was 20, she was struggling with 4 little ones. And if it wasn't for SNAP when I was a boy, I wouldn't have had food. If it wasn't for Medicaid, I wouldn't have had health care. And my story is one of millions of Americans, of people who, were really living on the edge and could barely survive, who needed those programs. And in this critical moment right now, when the economy is already sputtering along and suffering because of the very damaging policies Trump's put in place around the tariffs and these federal government cuts, the reality is he's made their life so much more difficult already. This bill would actually make it even worse and much harder for people to survive. And so we have to stand up in unison and realize this really isn't about party. Now, the other thing we have to do, Gabby, is we have to use local impacts to tell these stories. It can't just be stats and facts. And, we have to use real personal stories of Montanans to really illustrate what's happening out there, because it's much more pervasive than just a few people that are going to be impacted, right? It's not just low wealth communities, right? Or people who are living on the edges. Many Montanans benefit from Medicaid and from SNAP benefits, right? And think about SNAP in terms of what it's going to do to agriculture in this country, right? It's going to devastate agriculture and people who are actually in the business of putting food on the tables. SNAP not only provides food to those who need it most, it also provides a market for America's farmers that are going to be devastated when they cut these programs.
Right. Well, I have one more question for you, and this is really for our listeners. We did lose a lot in 2024. We lost our Democratic Senator John Tester. And I think since then, of course, we were really upset and we're still very disappointed. But there is a certain energy that has bloomed in Montana, and people are ready to fight and people are ready to organize. What advice do you have for folks living in rural Montana and more urban Montana to get involved and help fight and get Democrats elected locally all the way up to our national delegation? What are some tips you have for them to get involved? Maybe they've never been involved before and they're excited now. What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, first off, look, there's amazing momentum right now in our party, right? The wind is at our backs, but only if we're willing to take advantage of the opportunity. And what do I mean by that? James Carville said a few months ago that Democrats just need to get out of the way and watch Donald Trump fail. Well, that's a really piss poor strategy. The reality is relying on someone failing is not a strategy at all. We have an opportunity, given the fact that there's buyer's remorse in this country. A lot of people who supported Donald Trump, independents and even some moderate Republicans, are feeling deeply frustrated by what they see happening in this country right now, right? The impacts of these cuts are impacting their families' lives, their communities in ways that they never thought would happen. And so it allows us an opportunity, if we're willing to take it, to have conversations with people that haven't been part of our coalition for some time, who may have voted for Trump, and others out there who were disillusioned, who didn't vote at all. But that means we've got to roll up our sleeves and get out there and start those conversations right now. Get out and have conversations with your neighbors, with people that you work with people that you go to church with. And don't start through the lens of party or through the lens of candidates or even issues. Start through the lens of talking about what's happening in this country right now, and give people a chance to speak and listen to them, and then truly start building a relationship around their hopes and dreams. And if we do that, one conversation at a time and another after that, by the time we get to November of 26, we're going to be in a position to win again and win big. And so, what I would say is join your local party committee, roll up your sleeves, get involved in, the state party. There's lots of activities and things you can do right now in Montana to start laying the groundwork for success both in 26 and in 28. Montana is a state that's also been trending blue, as you know, and we have opportunities there. Of course, it seems on paper as like it's a very deep shade of red, but we can win there. We know with the right candidates, we have won there. But there's three commodities we have in elections, Gabby. It's time, people, and money. We can always recruit a few more people. We can always raise a few more bucks, but the one thing we can't get back is time. And so what I would say to your listeners right now is, look, if you believe right now that our democracy is on fire and our country is failing us, then we need to stand up right now, roll up our sleeves, regardless if we're a part of the Democratic Party, if we were once a part of the party and we haven't participated in a while, come on back. Lace up your boots and get back involved in the party. If you've never been involved in the Democratic Party and you're a little nervous, trust me, we won't bite, but we need your help, right? Because your values are aligned with ours. If you believe that we need to save this country, that we actually need to stop this authoritarian regime, join your local Democratic Party, roll up your sleeves, and work with us to help beat back what we're seeing right now, which is unprecedented in this country. There's great enthusiasm out there, Gabby, right now, and we will win if we're willing to take advantage of this opportunity. And part of that is starting by organizing at a very local level, one-on-one, neighbor to neighbor, person to person, door to door, communicating about our hopes and dreams for this country that we all deserve and that we all want to build together. So, Gabby, that's my ask of all of you. I really appreciate being on. And, look, there are great Democrats in the state of Montana, and I want to thank all of them. And even the folks who are independents who joined our cause, I want to thank all of them, not only in advance for the work they're going to do, but for the work they've done already to build a party in the state of Montana. I look forward to working with all of you in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chair Martin. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks, Gabby.